both totally agree that the narrative on the Cosmos series about the church and then the scientific development is just it's just disgusting. It's gross.
And I think in that series he does talk about Galileo. I believe he does
Mm-hmm.
mention Galileo's censure by the church, and you know
Yep.
him locked in a tower and unable to teach. And it seemed like very dramatic. You know
Well,
that.
and just not a. I mean, it's very selective. It's fake news. It's just,
Yeah.
it's as if the church just didn't do science or think critically or reflectively about anything, rather than you can frame it that way, right? Like the church didn't think about anything. They weren't interested in hearing anything contrary to their opinions. It's like no, they actually argued about it. They debated about it, and this was a debate between the then reigning kind of authority
Mhm.
on everything, Aristotle, versus him. It's like, well,
Yeah.
Aristotle stood the test of time, so you're gonna have to convince us like that he's not right, along with certain
I mean,
biblical passages they used as well. And that in sorry. Anyway, go ahead.
no, I agree. I'm just saying that they were they wanted to test his theories out. They wanted to have more, like you said, discussion, more evidence, you know more information before they just went ahead and discarded 1,500 years of 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 a theory. I think they
Right.
wanted to give um, as much. They wanted to be as thorough as possible. Not that they wanted to shut him up.
Right. Yeah, and the narrative is just like the church just was this kind of insanely domineering organization that if you just diverted from them just an iota, like you were burned at the stake. It's like no, I mean you have all sorts of debates going on through the entire history of the church, and sure they came to conclusions on things, but
Mhm.
there was also a lot of disagreement, and they tolerated it. That's where the notion of tolerance came from.
Yeah, and I think
It wasn't the
there,
Enlightenment that came up with the notion of tolerance. Good grief!
and I think people mis kind of mistake a little bit the I guess the intolerance of dogma within the Catholic Church, that there are certain things that the Catholic Church believes,
Mm-hmm.
and there's no disagreement, there's no discussion about these things that are laid down that are now established dogma.
Mm-hmm.
The discussion's over. But in terms of science and in terms of like natural processes that we observe in the world, there's not dogma, there's not even doctrine. It's just discovery and theory.
Mm-hmm.
Censure on theory, as long as that theory is given its uh, proper evaluation, and then if it's discovered that um, it seems to be true, then the church has no problem with promoting that. And I think I mentioned in one of our other discussions about evolution. Um, as a Catholic, I'm not bound to 7-day creation, and that evolution's wrong or it's evil. I'm not bound to reject evolution in any way. As far as the goal of evolution is the, the production of man and woman, and that as Catholics we believe that the first humans were given a soul by God, and that soul is from God, and was not developed through an evolutionary process. But how you got to humans, that's up for debate. So as a Christian, I can believe as a Christian that God used evolution to bring about that
Yeah,
human.
there's even Protestants that believe that. I mean, there's Protestants who believe in literal 6 day creation and that kind of stuff, but there's Protestants who believe in theistic evolution. Yeah, I mean it's it's like these guys, Neil deGrasse Tyson and those guys, read back into history the Scopes monkey trial.
Mm-hmm.
Like oh, all these Christians are basically the same in their thinking and sophistication as the folks involved in the Scopes trial,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a really terrible assumption to make. Yeah, I wonder if that's
You,
part. Go ahead.
oh, good.
I don't know, and I may be I'm a little bit speculating here because I'm not entirely sure what research they did or like what framework they're reading it through. But it kind of sounds like that when they give their narrative of history, is that that's what they're doing.
Yeah, that we came out of the Dark Ages and through the Enlightenment, and then and also I think too. I don't think when I read the quote about Neil deGrasse Tyson wanting to meet Sir Isaac Newton,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I think that Neil deGrasse Tyson would look at Sir Isaac Newton's theism as a huge hole in his intellectual acumen. Like I think he would see
Hmm.
that Isaac Newton was a byproduct of his and an alternative, and that if Isaac Newton lived today, obviously he'd be an atheist.
Right, right. Yeah, he was brilliant despite his Christian
Yeah,
convictions, not because of them. Yeah.
and I think a lot of those people, Stephen Hawking and those guys, I think they would any Christian I brought up, Galileo, Copernicus, uh, you know, Sir Francis Bacon, I think they would all pretty much have that same blanket statement about all those guys is that they would just be they're just a product of their time.
Yeah, I, I could see them. I don't know if they would say that, but I could certainly see them saying something like that. I hope they wouldn't. I would hope they wouldn't be that uncharitable, but I think they tend to be that uncharitable.
Yeah, and the thing is too, I would be able to say I would say that too in a sense. I mean, I would more be inclined to accept that if those same individuals like Copernicus and servants, if they didn't also write about theology, like if they if they didn't also write about their faith in a rational in a very reasoned way, because they also wrote all these guys wrote theological works too. So it wasn't just they didn't just write about physics. They wrote about theology and how they what they thought about God and that sort of thing. So I don't think it was just culturally Christian. Is what I'm
Hmm.
saying. They were ardent Christians.
Yeah, and yeah.
So um, yeah, I think and also I think too that we touched on it before, but the fact that they don't give credit where credit's due really bothers me
Hmm.
because I feel like they went to universities that were I mean, as I said, we can trace back the university system to the creation of cathedral schools that were created and funded by the church. So have higher institutions of learning. Um, the Catholic Church primarily um, funded those things,
Hmm.
and it just makes it sound they make it sound like things just happened like by magic. That things just these scientific theories were discovered. Well, who funded them? Who who educated the people that discovered these things?
Hmm.
Where's the chain of events that lead up to a Galileo or a Copernicus, or like I said, a first Sir Francis Bacon, or you know, or an Einstein. What's the chain of events that led up to that, and what role does Christianity play in all of that narrative? And I
Yeah,
would say it's a huge role.
yeah. That's a good point because I think you're right. They do kind of portray it as that these guys are really largely just rebels to the church. That they kind of even if they weren't raised completely independent of it, they were probably just kind of spiteful of it and then became these rebels and stood up against the monolithic church, and that's why they're heroes. And
Mm.
it's yeah, my guess is it's a little bit more nuanced than that. Like, there was
And that's
some actual appreciation for the church, and
well,
but
even though to a
I don't
point
know.
where you have Neil deGrasse Tyson talking about Galileo in such a negative way, it's like at least have some appreciation for the history of where you're at. Like the fact that you're able to do these things and believe these things and think these things, there's a causal relationship historically of how we got to Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Hmm.
The fact that Neil deGrasse Tyson rejects God is because, obviously he doesn't see the evidence, but the fact that he's even at a point where he's researching this stuff and believing this stuff and reveling in all this wonderful things he's seeing in the universe is because help fund people that got him there.
Hmm. Okay.
So that's my big qualm. That's where I it's not fair, and it's
Hmm.
and aside from being uh, you know uh, ahistorical and
Hmm.
anachronistic, it's just uncharitable too.
Hmm. I'm not honestly. I'm not a historian, so I'm doing my best to kind of.
Yeah.
I've looked into it a little bit, but not certainly not enough for me to speak authoritatively. Other than to say, from what little I have looked into it, Neil deGrasse Tyson's narrative of history, even from the little bit I've looked into it, is just off. Like it's very uncharitable, very
Mm.
very very one track. Seems like ideologically driven rather than historically derived.
Yeah.
You know.
I think I totally agree with you 100%. I think too with Dawkins as well, the
Oh yeah,
Hitchens,
yeah.
all the new atheists. I think have this aggression towards a theistic worldview, but they don't. I mean, like I said, I keep saying this too, is that you are able to have those views because theists help develop them. you know, you just reject the cause of it all, and claim there's no evidence for it. But the fact that you're at that point is you owe a debt of gratitude
To
to
the yeah, they're all
to
standing on
theists.
right. They're all standing on shoulders of giants in order to rebuke them. And there's some right. There's some like understandability to like look. They developed the things as far as they could, and then later people developed them further, and later people developed them further, so that you can look back and say, yeah, Aristotle wasn't right in his physics, but if you don't have respect for Aristotle, you're an idiot.
Mhm.
Or maybe Newton and his physics didn't account for certain things. But if you look back and say, "Oh, well, then Newton was an idiot," then you're the idiot. So yeah, no, I totally agree with that. There's very little respect for the shoulders that you're standing on when you criticize the people that've gone before you like that, and the church, and then to characterize the church as this total like backwoods hicks who just thought there were demons flying around doing
Mhm.
everything, and they're just all superstitious morons. Ugh, that's sickening.
Yeah. Or the quote that he said, "I want to put on the table not why 85% of the members of the National Academy of Science reject God. I want to know why 15% of the National Academy don't." Like, don't you know that they basically, I think, are. I'm going to tell you right now, Neil deGrasse Tyson. The reason why they don't is because they are in line with the historical traditional view of science. They are inheritors of Galileo and Copernicus and Sir Francis Bacon. They are the true inheritors of those giants.
Hmm.
They're not rejecting and not looking down upon their forebears. So I think that they're more true scientists than than someone like a Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Hmm. Yeah, I kind of see.
Boom! I just laid down the gauntlet on you.
Yeah, I kind of I see those guys as more ideologues than. I mean, look, when you speak on your area of study, fine, but they speak a lot on areas that they're not experts in. It's like, well, then at that point, you
Mm.
know, I mean, you're trying to use your professorship to have the equal authority on all of those things. It's like that's illegitimate. Now, look at myself. I'm pontificating on issues, and I'm not really an authority on anything. But I'm not claiming to be right. I'm not claiming to be like
Yeah.
an authority in. I mean, I've studied more philosophy than history and that kind of stuff. Um, I'm claiming to be a layperson who is at least relatively well read,
Hmm.
uh, and
Oh,
just
you are. I
op-
agree. I think you are right.
opining on these issues, right?
Yeah.
But I think those guys use their actual credentials and stuff in ways that I think are disturbing.
Yeah. And it influences people to think improper. It gives them improper knowledge that they then buy wholesale because, oh, this is Neil deGrasse Tyson. He's on a TV show. I mean, I hate to say that people are simple enough to just buy wholesale what he's saying,
Mm-hmm.
but they are. I mean, there's some people who just accept what what the internet tells them or what the TV show tells them or whatever. They're that's where they're at. And
Yeah.
so he has a PhD or whatever he has. I mean, he knows certain things very well, and he's very articulate.
Mm-hmm.
So it's there's the rhetorical force behind his words because of what he does and what title he holds and who he's advising and what science board he's on. So those things all come with weight, and I think he would be okay with pushing someone towards atheism. I think he's okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
I think he would love that if a Christian or a former Christian came up to him and said, you know what, I watched your Cosmos series, and I'm just, I used to be a Christian, and I just realized now that you're right. I think he would be like, man, that's a victory.
Sure. Sure.
I think he'd be totally cool with that.
Mm-hmm.
He enlightened somebody,
Yeah.
and that to me is just that does bother me.
Well, and I think it bothers me a lot because he's credentialed. Uh, People think that he's equally versed in history, maybe equally versed in history as he is in astrophysics or whatever.
Mhm. Yeah,
Uh, and when you don't make that separation, you're trying to now leverage your authority and credentials to pontificate on matters that are more ideologically based rather than, and that just seems to be an abuse of his position. If he is going to do the Cosmos series and say those things, and I don't know actually who's writing that. I don't know if he has some historian in the background writing that history, but if he is, that
yeah,
seems that's scary. Like,
yeah,
uh, but or if he's doing it, then he needs to say, "Look, this is how I see the narrative of the history of the church and the Enlightenment and the scientific discoveries after that. But I'm not really an expert in those areas. I'm just giving you my lay version of it." That would be at least an honest approach.
yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think that should be a historical disclaimer.
Yep. Yeah.
the, the views expressed here are not exactly historically accurate. They were the views of Neil deGrasse Tyson. Viewer
Yeah.
discretion advised.
Right. I'm a layperson when it comes to history, but honestly, there were some historical points that I'm like, look, if you've read anybody who actually is a historian on these matters, it's like, I mean, maybe I shouldn't say anybody, but well-respected scholars on the topic. It's like that's not what they think. That's not how the narrative goes. Uh,
Yeah.
so I don't know. A well-read layperson in history may be able to refute his claims, even though he's a PhD in astrophysics. Or I don't know exactly what his PhD's in, but
I think it's
um,
astrophysics.
yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I'm not going to talk to him about that. I have no idea. He's the authority in that stuff. But
Yeah, definitely. I wouldn't even go close to that.
yeah,
Say, hey, Neil, you go. That's your deal.
right.
But yeah, your history classes ended probably in your sophomore year in college. So back in back in undergrad,
Right.
when you got your gen eds out of the way,
Yeah.
you know. So but yeah, uh, I wanted to quickly wrap this up, and we love C.S. Lewis, both you and I, and so I wanted to share a quote I found by C.S. Lewis on atheism that I think is wonderful. So, in the immortal words of C.S. Lewis, atheism turns out to be too simple. If the whole universe has no meaning, we should never have found out that it has no meaning. C.S. Lewis.
A hush falls over the crowd.
Yeah. So if it has no meaning, we should never have found out. But why? Why did we find out it has no meaning? Why would we even have that inclination to discover that?
Hmm. Yeah, see, I love C.S. Lewis.
Yeah. Great, great communicator.
Hmm.